Hello, welcome to Quackalope, thank you for being here. Today I'm bringing you a preview of Bestiary of Sigillum, a 2 to 4 player skirmish game with a ton of asymmetric player powers, character abilities, different ways to design your squad, and a lot of interesting decision making here on the board. So, stay tuned, let's dive in, let's take a closer look and help you decide if this is something you want to actually add to your game collection and get down onto the table with some of your closest friends. So, Bestiary of Sigillum. This is a world where battles are common and war has been raged across the landscape for some time. However, the landscape of fighting is changing. Use landscape twice there, probably not the best intro phrase, but the nature of war is changing, it's transforming. You see, the Bestiary of Sigillum is a tome, a book. It is the thing that is now summoning these creatures from the nether regions and allowing them to wage war across the continent and across the landscape here on this battlefield, and you are one of the many rulers who now have access to this tome. You're going to be using it to build a squad of asymmetric powers that link together in different modular ways, thrashing them down onto the player field here and seeing if you can destroy your opponent's castle and conquer the kingdom before they can do the same to yours. That's the main objective of Bestiary. You're going to be focused on ripping apart your opponent. Now, that's pretty easy to do when push comes to shove. There's two ways you can score hits against your opponent. First, you can control one of these various catapult regions. These ballistas are going to be firing off shots depending on who controls them, and the way that you dominate or have control is oftentimes just by having someone on or adjacent to one of these two locations. The other way you can cause destruction and mayhem to your opponent is by ripping apart and destroying his army. Every time you destroy or remove one of his beasts, you deal a damage to his resources, causing him to resummon and potentially resetting the board, giving you that slight advantage. So where's the nuance of this game? Where's the thing that has me so intrigued and excited to continue diving in time and time again? And let me be straight, we have a gameplay over on the channel as well if you want more information, and this is a sponsored video. That being said, I've also played this multiple times off camera, both preparing and now just finally enjoying the game. There is a ton of choice and agency, and it comes down to all of the different characters you have. You're going to be running with a squad of 3 in a 2-player game, and these squads can be composed of various different types of creatures, things that deal tons of offensive damage, things that are designed a little bit more strategically to defend your base. You have various different creatures that can move fast or utilize different landscapes around the region here, whether that's the mountain, the forest, or the water. There is a lot of different combinations that pair well together, that start triggering more and more powerful abilities, but then on top of that, the book has its own customized squads, things and characters that are kind of designed to be their own little faction. And those factions change up the way you play and change up the way your opponent has to react. And so far, the game has felt very tight and very balanced. If you're going in with a bit of an expectation, if you know the type of squad you've built. If you don't know these cards, the game can feel, let's say, a little chaotic and like there's a lot more experience you need to learn, and I've enjoyed both sides of that. But there will be a caveat there for those of you that don't want to dig through every single one of these cards. Part of the gem of this game will be putting together and piecing together your squad to run up against your opponent. So, how do these cards actually work? How does the gameplay actually flow? Well, you're going to have your squad of units, and each of your units are going to have a series of their own special abilities. I'll go ahead and resummon all of my tokens here onto the board so I can show you how they work in just a moment. But each of these special abilities is going to be custom and unique to each one of your characters. So every character we have has 3 different core abilities represented by tokens and little bits of text. These will determine the way that they interact with the board, whether they give a buff or debuff to other characters, who and how they can target, whether or not they cause you to move, and more specifically, whether or not they give you an advantage, a token, and potentially cause damage or allow you to attack your opponent. The classic move with every one that will have some variability to it, but it'll always be fairly standard, is going to be the top move. The move or attack. And you can slide your token to either side to decide if you want to move on the board, depending on your movement speed, or if you want to go ahead and straight up attack your opponent. Now, the other two abilities will be more precisely asymmetric, and these abilities, when you use them, will pop up here onto this refresh phase. So for instance, if this ability, Optical Sight, had a cooldown of 4, it would pop here into this location and would not be re-available to me until 4 more rounds had passed, spinning this dial and making that 6 mark come back over, indicating that I can pick it up. I really like this board. We'll talk about that more in a second. But you build your squad together. You've got asymmetric powers across them, 9 total, with 3 of them being more standard move and attack. It just changes based off the character. Like you might have a ranged character or someone that benefits from being in a certain location or being up close. From there, you start summoning onto the board, and we won't all start out here on the tableau. Instead, at the very beginning of the game, depending on your order or the way that you've actually built your squad, you'll go ahead and pop your creatures down onto the board. Now, their summoning zone is the castle itself, so if you want to move other creatures into that area, you'll have to go ahead and use a movement ability to pull your characters off and go ahead and place your other characters on. That's the standard intro of the game. Usually start with some type of typical distribution, but this is where the game starts getting fun, complicated, and incredible. It's going to be when you start deciding how to use your special powers and abilities to manipulate and maneuver around the zone. And I don't know this team as well. I'll be honest, West was running it, and it was a significant challenge, but I have played with Tempest, Bestiary, and Aquas a few times now, and I really know how they operate. There's an intricate puzzle between the 3 of them that causes me to use up a lot of my tokens in a single shift and then cycle through and hope that my tokens come back into rotation before my enemy has taken advantage. I do know things like Cornubus here, the Stone Demon, is able to pop into various different locations if he uses his flight ability. So he can pop in next to a ballista, and then he can actually set up there and have more and stronger defense, which is pretty powerful and allowed West to get an early attack on me from the very get-go of the game. I know Mortem here, the vampire, is going to be focused on taking out enemies and swarming them with his bat swarm. He again has a ton of movement, so he can actually dash forward. And then I know Cerberus here is going to be a little bit more of the powerhouse, able to destroy or attack everyone adjacent to him if he's in the right zone. So if my characters had unfortunately spread out like this and the werewolf got into the center of them, everyone is potentially getting damage. Along with that, I believe it's Cornubus is going to be able to provide defense to everyone there in the party, so they can get into position quickly, they can hold down their zones, and they can also have a swath of defense cover them up. But my characters are also very cool. Tempest here is going to be able to control time, manipulating the board, but also giving advantage to other players, allowing them to take both a move and attack action on the same turn. So, the time loop here allows me to go ahead and give swiftness to one of my allies. If I gave swiftness here to Bestiary, I then would be able to move and fire off his crossbow. His crossbow, let's shift this out of the way, his crossbow travels in a straight line and is going to deal damage based off of how far it traveled. So if I hit the vampire here, I would be dealing 2 damage. However, I could also use Winch, which allows Bestiary here to actually shift back an opponent, moving him away from a, possible zone, keeping them from having control of one of these ballistas, and also distancing them from myself to deal more damage. So right now, I deal 3, and that vampire slime would pop off the board, scoring me my first point towards victory. Along with that, I have Optical Sight. Optical Sight is going to give me the ability to strengthen myself. I could use that now if I wanted, but since I've already attacked the vampire, I really shouldn't. However, if I wanted to get rid of the werewolf, and I didn't have the werewolf close enough to me, I could use that to power myself up and potentially fire off a shot at the werewolf as well. Now, Aquas here is going to be able to copy my buff. So, Tempest gave me the buff of swiftness, allowing me to attack and move on the same turn. Aquas is going to come in here with fluidity. Fluidity allows Aquas, and I should technically pop this up into the 3 zone, Fluidity allows Aquas to copy my buff, giving it swiftness as well. Now here's the amazing thing about Fluidity getting swiftness. Swiftness allows Fluidity to then move and attack. Well, if I use Might of the Water, I get to dive into shift this. I'm moving things around. It's not the best example, but if I use Might of the Water, I get to dive into the water, giving me a buff for the next attack I do. Now the next attack I do is going to be Pouring Rain. Pouring Rain is going to smash into the back of this werewolf, dealing, I believe, 2 damage to his head, which is close to the point of taking him off the map. And then, finally, based off of where these tokens have gone down onto the board, I can use a skill called Time Loop. Time Loop is going to be coming from Tempest here, and Time Loop allows me to refresh one of my character's tokens by 1 mark, or push one of my opponent's tokens by 1 mark on this time track. So I could pull both of my Ballista Master's tokens forward, getting them back to me a whole turn earlier. Or I could slow my opponents down by 1, putting them in a position, I think I can do this, I would cycle it over here, putting them in a position where it would take them even longer to get their most powerful abilities. This whole push and pull, this whole combo and chaining multiplier is true not only with this unit, but also with so many of these other characters and creatures that you go through in the deck. And as you build these squads, you can play customized to how you like. Do you want to be super strong, taking over one of the ballistas and then just wrecking your opponent's characters? Do you want to be fast and quick like both of these teams are, moving in, getting control, but also dying quickly? Do you want to be focused heavily on support, giving one character the ability to storm forward while everyone else pumps in their own support and their own swiftness and their own abilities into that character? Do you want to focus on characters that play quickly on this timeline, giving you back your resources and allowing you to do a lot of little things very quickly, killing them with a dozen of different razor blades? Or do you want to focus on one big attack, kind of like I was, where my single move could score me 4 or 5 points? However, I might be in a position where I have to wait 2 or 3 turns before I get back the best of my abilities, spending that time to set up and maneuver around the board, positioning myself to hopefully make the most of them when I get them back the next time. That's the core structure of this. You spawn down onto this board, and then it's a skirmish match, kind of a war chest-like fighting arena with the same concept of the asymmetric powers, but more depth here than you find in most head-to-head 2-player skirmish games. It's got a lot of lore and flavor and story that's being told just here on the board itself, and I personally am a massive fan of the aesthetic and the artwork. I like this sort of medieval book-style writing. I like the way that the characters appear to kind of be sketches of an ethereal plane that you're pulling from. Now, another cool part that we haven't focused on yet is going to be this time track over here. This is your resource track. This follows what items you've used and when you get them back. And honestly, this round track is probably the cleanest system I think I've seen to accomplish this. We have a ton of different abilities with variable different characters that have different cooldown stages throughout the course of the game, and you use them on different turns. Instead of placing them on a track where you have to move your tokens from position to position, you place your tokens down on a track and they stay exactly where you are. And not only that, your opponent uses the same track, and you spin this dial, and it takes you 1 stage forward each time, until finally you have access to your tokens and they have access to theirs. I really like how this track works. It is always accurate. If I use a refresh 4 on the 3rd turn of the game, it'll still be 4 turns before it comes back, but it'll be in a different position than the other tokens that I've used. Instead of relying on you shifting tokens down 1 step at a time or maneuvering them so you can know when you get them back, this track and this spinning wheel does it for you. It allows you to focus on what you need to focus on, which is the strategy of the gameplay and when and how you can actually use your abilities to get the most out of it. This is really good overall. I've had a lot of fun diving into it. I'm really looking forward to continuing to pair different creatures together and seeing what they're actually going to have on the crowdfunding page in terms of add-ons, stretch goals, and all the other nonsense you get. That being said, I do always try to give some degree of caveat, especially when I'm the most excited about or I've enjoyed these games the most. And my caveat here would be, if you're still deciding if this is right for you, this is more complicated than games like War Chess, those abstract strategy games. This has asymmetric powers and a whole deck of cards that it really is good if you know these well enough to cycle through them. Also, in the first few games you play, you probably won't know what your opponent can do, and while it can help to read through the cards and get familiarity with them, really, it's going to take a few head-to-head matches before you understand how their squad is built and how to counter or react to it. Sometimes I felt like I was sitting here doing my puzzle and then waiting to see what happened on my opponent's turn, even though theoretically I could know their squad well enough for an abstract game. Everything's perfect information. I could know their squad well enough to read 3 or 4 different moves ahead like you might in chess or checkers or other abstracts. This was just complicated enough and just intricate enough that I didn't try or didn't feel like I needed to do that. Instead, by about mid-game, I was familiar with what my opponent was playing and I could start reacting or predicting it a little bit, but sometimes that was too late. And more often than not, I wanted to sit down and play another session immediately, usually with the same squads, because those squads I now knew. Sometimes we'd switch hands and go back and forth, but either way, it's a little bit more advanced than I would typically recommend if you're coming in from some of those more abstract puzzles. But if you're coming in from skirmish games, from straight up brawling asymmetric player powers, this small box really does a number for the size that it's providing. So, there you have it. That's a preview, that's an overview, that's a first look, that's a dive into the Bestiary of Sigillum, a fantasy game, a little head-to-head 2-player or 4-player skirmish game that I think is worth paying attention to. If you've watched to this point, thank you so much. Make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, swing over there, give the campaign a closer look, and whatever you do, remember to do the important thing, get out and play some games. See you next time. Thank you.